You can see that the Parched North, that is coming soon. Very interesting program that finally the penny has dropped to most African countries and of course the entire world. We know the reality of climate change is here. We're smarting out of it. A lot of our people in the northern region are dying because of the effects of climate change. But has it really sunk in us on how much is really advancing or adversely affecting our country as it is right now? We're losing almost 3% of the gross domestic product every year on climate change. And we had the outgoing president, Uhuru Kenyatta, saying it's not a future problem. It is our present serious threat to all also countries across the world. And this is what we're discussing right now with our panelists. We continue apace with this conversation. Before we took a short break, I think we will review, Professor Peter Kagwanja. I addressed the issue of the Green New Deal. I don't know.
Green Deal.
Yes,
we'll try to deal with that.
Just the duplicity of most of these nations.
Yes, but yes. You are now just doing what I want to criticize.
Okay.
The Africans are good at jumping at every debate like this new. I was there, the structural adjustment programs and all. We came to the issue of human security vis-a-vis state security and all that. We debated that. We have debated virtually everything. And everything to us is new. Yet the agenda about the Africa and the African has not changed. The agenda is, how do we how do we end the current international division of labor that reduces the African into a hewer of wood and drawer of water, exploiter of raw material, and an importer of manufactured goods that are overvalued? Meaning, if I make 10 shillings, I spend all of it and more on buying a radio, a refrigerator, and whatever. Why? Because we are not industrialized. So my ton of coffee is not enough to buy one bicycle, which is important, and so on and so forth. So when Nkrumah talked about the Africa is not poor, it is the African who is poor. And when President Museveni is talking about Africa is not poor in resources, it's only poor in wealth creation, the debates are the same, 50 years apart, but they are the same. And therefore, in the 21st century, Africa has not changed its own debate and its own discourse, because we are not the ones who shape global discourses. We are not the ones, and those are the discourses that are shaping the capitalist penetration and in other parts of the world. So what is the New Deal in the Green Deal? Let the Green Deal not be an argument that Africa should not be industrialized. Because it is relegating us to the era of slave and slave trade.
I agree.
Yeah. So whatever form it takes, however well articulated it is by all the lawyers and all those drafters of international communiques and treaties and whatever, let the Green Deal not be an impediment to Africa's industrialization. Because if it is, then we will never be making any progress. My argument is the West, is China and others, China, are they willing to give us the cutting edge technology which ensure that we industrialize without polluting the world? That's a big question. But access to technology is a must. If it is not, then we go the way of China. And I dare say so.
Which is?
In 1978, China decided to take on the world. And at that time, there were only 2 countries in Africa that were poorer than China. China was in the list of 55 countries, it was the 53rd.
Right.
Only 2 countries were poorer than China by 1978, when Deng Xiaoping introduced the opening up and reforms. Now, 42 years later, after reform, it is a world power. Yes, accused of polluting the world, but it's a world power like the West. So it took rebellion. Now, China is the one which is leading the world in climate conforming to the doctrine of climate. If you see, I went to Beijing in 2005. Smog everywhere. You go to Beijing today, it's a model city in terms of trees and everything. You go to India, it's the same. So let the Green Deal or whatever climate deal we are going to have not be an impediment to Africa's industrialization, because that will be consigning us to perpetual slavery.
But if I follow your train of thought, Professor Kagwanja, you're going the India way, we have the smog, we have the China way, we have the smog. So you're telling us essentially that we should go full hog industrialization. It doesn't matter the tenets of this climate justice. Just do whatever you can, industrialize. Then after that, now come and tell us, oh yes, now we need to heal from the climate wounds we've inflicted on ourselves.
No.
That is a way to go.
No,
that's what you're saying. Essentially,
no.
If you follow that train of thought,
my argument is this: Africans should also have terms in this negotiation about the green. It's not Green Deal we are going to be given. First, as we speak, that debate we are having here is in the West, between Biden and Trump. Should we tap our oil resources, our coal resources, and so it is there. As we are talking about, why is China and why is the United States giving themselves a long period of 20, 30 years to reach the carbon neutral kind of development? It is because they wanted to wean themselves of these polluting economies when they want to hold Africa behind. My argument is as follows: the West and the developed East, including China and India, must give Africa access to technology that does not pollute. That's step number one. Step number two, if that is not given, any Green Deal that holds Africa back from industrializing is criminal, because it is relegating us to the age of slavery and slave trade, where we are growers of raw materials and consumers of manufactured goods. We need to add value to our goods so that we enter into the market space as equals with the rest of the world. So now bringing this, and you seem to be both line, hook, and sinker to this idea that climate control is more important than anything. We are planting more trees in Africa than they are planting in Europe.
True.
Okay, we are taking care of our environment, our animals. Which country has more land and controlled by animals or inhabited by animals than us? Let's not be criminalized or basically demonized as people who are not caring for the environment. We are caring for it, but we also care for our wealth.
Right.
We need to create our wealth.
Just allow me, because I wanted to raise the issue. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Also on the duplicity of these nations that we see, because I think now the warring factions that we have between Russia and Ukraine has really brought to bear, some of the dark underbellies and the hypocrisy of these nations at the end of the day.
Yes.
Yeah, because right now they're in an energy crisis. Most of them are like Germany. They are reverting now to coal.
Yes.
Yeah, they say, why can't we now also expand our
coal consumption?
Yet they have targets of 2030. This is where now we'll actually have a zero emission of what? The green emissions right now. This is what I want you to speak to. That, when it hits the most is when we see the clear picture. It's not about the interest of the world. It's their interest at the end of the day.
Debal, I think the question is, when will we learn what we think Europe, America stands for, and what they really stand for? This is the political consciousness of our leadership and the population. And that's why I said what's very critical is political leadership. Is whether or not that we have to ask questions about whether the political leadership in our continent is in league with the international system, or they're in league with their own people. This is questions that were posed by the great Patrice Lumumba. These questions were posed by other political leaders. Most of them, Debal, were eliminated. The reason why we brought democracy in Kenya, and I was part of that, is because we want to speak freely. Because there's so much to be said. The great, I think he passed away, Allah yarhamah if true, Usman Sembene, a West African filmmaker and Renaissance man, who wrote probably the classic African novel called God's Bits of Wood.
God's Bits of Wood, yes.
Debal did not caricature the situation of the African personality at that time. It is the caricature today, Debal, that either we have not the ambition, but the cojones, because I cannot use the proper English word, to move towards a direction of fundamental transformation in our continent, and particularly in this region. If you want to understand what my learned senior last time on the show said about the pitfalls of national consciousness, is I've always said that the settler, the native, doesn't want his freedom. What he wants is the settler's farm, his house, and preferably his blonde wife. So the consciousness that we have is runs along these lines. And unless, we fundamentally accept that the condition of the African in the 21st century must change because of the environment that we're living in. I'll give you an example. You always hear about human rights. You always hear about the rule of law. You always hear about democratic government. Right? When Alexis de Tocqueville, the great French diplomat, visited the United States, you know what he said? He said that most of the leaders were in the private sector and were in the they did not want they were in the, or most of the outstanding men did not want elected office and were careerists. And it is the very thuggish fellows who are in office. We have a lot of leaders in Kenya. We have a lot of leaders in our country, East Africa. Most of them have gone into careers and farming and all these things. They don't want to get into elected office because the rot and the patheticism of, if I can coin a word, of politics in our region is it's terrible. However, there is no other way in which leaders can transform this country, and this region in particular, our home East Africa, unless we go into politics and into elections. That is why I joined politics, Debal. I never went to stand in an ethnic community that was mine. My grandfathers were the founders of Nairobi. I wanted to stand in Langata. I was told you don't have to stand, you can join the government after we win, but God had other plans. We need other people in the National Assembly. Debal, have you seen the quality of our National Assembly? Have you? Just take a list and write it down, Debal. You will be appalled. It is really just terrible. Even the intellectual class is not represented. The business class is not represented. Debal, I don't want to sound elitist, and it will sound very blasé and elitist if I say this. But I remember when we had 212 MPs, and Mr. Nyong'o was there, and Martha was there, and a lot of the men and women who are outstanding in this country were there. Mr. Kibaki was there, Mr. Matiba was there, men who could stand on his feet and say something about this country. When Masinde Muliro was there, we could talk about all the men and women who could stand up and articulate an issue in this country.
Thank you.
The farmers and the truck drivers have invaded the National Assembly.
We need to wind up on that. We need
to get people of outstanding quality into this country's leadership so that we can bring this region together and move forward. And they need to get out of these Safaricom businesses and come into politics.
You're very angry.
Yeah, he's really.
I love my country.
Blown his gasket.
No, I love my country.
That patriotism.
There's a difference between loving your country and blowing your casket. I don't blow caskets. I'm the jolliest person in the world. And everybody here can testify to that fact. We want East Africa and a new flag. We have a new national anthem. We don't want these colonial constructs called Kenya. You know, it's named after a boat in River Kismayo. No. Did you know that? The country was called the MSV Kenya. That is where the country has been named for.
No.
Yes, that is how it was named.
There was a conversation between Kivoi and
it was named after a boat that used to plow the Juba River, because Jubaland used to be part of this protectorate. So we need an East Africa. We don't need a country named after
I need to draw attention to the Daily Nation. I think we also stopped for time. Prof, we ought to say something, because we wanted to wind up on this issue, and we talk about fertilizer.
Yes,
and
yes. You know, before we wind up on this issue, there is something my colleague Ash, I acknowledge the profound thoughtfulness that he brings to this debate, the historical hindsight that he is able to command. and he said something.
Prof, let me butt in. I think your mic has dropped. Can I just fix it? Then we continue the conversation.
My senior. Please repeat those words again. I'm really enjoying it from my teacher.
I was simply
Please say it again.
acknowledging.
You know how to butter your bread.
No. It's my senior. You didn't say that when your teacher was praising you. Don't be selfish. Go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, I was saying
We'll fix it nicely.
there's
Just say
something
it,
that
yeah.
we need to acknowledge.
Yes.
And I was acknowledging my colleague
Harsh.
here, Harsh, for the profundity of thought
Is it clear?
and the historical hindsight that he commands in bringing certain issues to our attention.
Yeah, let me
And
continue.
there is something that he commended about capitalism.
Start again.
And he said capitalism does not have a spirit.
Wait.
No, continue, Prof. Hashi, can
In my view, capitalism has a spirit.
continue?
And the spirit of capitalism is greed and monopoly. And that is why, to be able to manage capitalism, we have to address the spirit of greed and monopoly. And therefore, it is incumbent upon us to bring people into leadership who are erstwhile in being able to arrest and manage this spirit. And relating this, of course, to the question of the Green Deal, I think we need to bring to the attention of Kenyans that this deal came out as a response to what appeared to the Western Hemisphere as a global climate emergency, whereby it was incumbent upon them to come up with strategies of transforming their economies into being climate neutral and resource efficient. That is not bad. And secondly, it was concerned with the whole question of laying down of standards of sustainability. And sustainability, even in our case, is a relevant issue. And thirdly, they were concerned with providing a roadmap to achieving environmental justice. And I think you raised out the question of environmental justice to our people who need to exercise environmental stewardship. And therefore, achieving zero pollution is not a grandiose ideal. And therefore, preservation and restoration of ecosystems and biodiversity is critical. And our people, both leaders and citizens, need to be brought into a situation of awareness of these issues so that we can engage the West from a position of national consciousness to be able to deal with the spirit of capitalism that has captured the West and has driven them into the kind of atrocities that they have performed in Africa, including environmental degradation. Yeah.
Indeed.
Wonderful.
There was one point that the British controlled most of the world. They conquered. And the question is, why did this happen? So what I want to remind my colleagues is that every nation does anything for their best national interest. And Africa is not going to be exception. The Green Deal, as you can see it, where was it from? Was it originally from Africa, or is it from somewhere else? And therefore, until such time comes, and until we Africans understand that we need to have our agenda, a very serious agenda, calculated based on our ability to be able to have an impact, make sense. The fastest growing countries in the world right now is in Africa. Africa has 1.3 billion people. Africa is one of the largest landmass. Africa has incredible resources that are untapped. This, as you can see, is being exploited every single day. I'll give you a very quick example. The homes we're building now are modern homes. They have electricity, they have water, they have pipes, they have everything. Look at what is inside that home. From furnitures to piping to electricity is from somewhere else in the world, not in Africa. So that when I build my house in Homa Bay County, I made sure that everything that is in that house is made in Kenya. From construction to the furnitures, there were few equipment that I got from England and all that kind of thing. But everything, including tiles, is made in Kenya, not in China. And therefore, why are we crying when we're turning our economy to Chinese, when they're importing fish, and we have enough fish in Kenya? Yeah. We are importing toothpaste. We are importing toothpicks from China when we can make our own. Correct. So why are we crying? And this all goes to what Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote, my friends, decolonizing the mind. So we can have a mindset that can do it. Within the East Africa community,
thank you.
Within the Southern Africa, ECOWAS, and North Africa.
Thank you.
That's the answer.
All right, I want just to turn the crack now to the fertilizer issue. And we can see from the back page of the Daily Nation today, it says subsidized fertilizer now capped at 100 bags per farmer. This is what you should be aware about. President said cheap fertilizer is meant to help increase production and therefore lower maize prices. Now, this fertilizer was a very contentious issue a week ago. And I just want to show you what the Moroccan World News is saying here. The Morocco World News, according to Saud Anour yesterday, it says, you can see the picture here of President William Ruto. And this is also the ambassador of Morocco to Kenya, where we had it last week. And it says that Rabat El Mokhtar Gambu, Morocco's former ambassador to Kenya, confirmed this weekend that the East African country will soon receive batches of Moroccan fertilizer to boost its agricultural output. Speaking to journalists on Saturday, Gambu said, quote unquote, from next week, fertilizer will start arriving in Kenya in batches to meet the half price promised by President William Samoei Ruto. The Moroccan diplomat added that the Kenyan president had promised to bring in Moroccan fertilizer to lower the commodity's retail price from 6,500 shillings to 3,500 shillings. Last week, Kenya's newly elected president revoked his country's recognition of the Polisario's self-proclaimed Sahrawi Republic in a move that aligned with his long-standing endorsement of Moroccan stance in the Western Sahara dispute. Ruto's decision was warmly welcomed by the Kenyan political elite, and many in Morocco consider it another milestone in the country's largely effective African diplomacy. A joint statement by Morocco and Kenya followed Ruto's tweet that first broke the news. The statement read, Kenya's rescind its recognition of the SRDR and initiate steps to wind down the entity's presence in the country. Ruto further pledged to reinforce bilateral cooperation with Morocco in key sectors in an effort to address pressing issues facing the East African country, including food security. Prior to the recent diplomatic rapprochement between Rabat and Nairobi, Kenya has been importing fertilizer from Saudi Arabia and Russia due to the state's formal recognition of a self-proclaimed separatist Sahrawi Republic. However, the East African country is now turning to Morocco. Given the ongoing global shortage of fertilizer, the North African kingdom is home to over 70% of world's phosphate rock reserves and houses OCP Group, one of the largest fertilizers company. It goes on and on. And of course, we hack back to this particular spot that we had last week, looking the fertilizer is here, but at the expense of diplomatic standoff between Sahrawi and Kenya. Right, let's just begin. It was your turn. All right, let's just begin with Professor.
I thought it was my turn.
No, it was not your turn. It is Kagoji's turn. You just spoke.
Yeah. No, I can donate it to you if you are urging to.
No.
But it's okay. I mean, let's first of all look at this. We need to look at Morocco-Africa relations from a long-term perspective. I'm a good friend of Gabo, the former ambassador here, because like me, he was a scholar in the U.S. when I was in the U.S. He was teaching at Harvard. He's a very nuanced scholar from Morocco, and I have attended a lot of conferences in Rabat and Casablanca now, on a whole range of things. One thing is very clear: there is what all the North African states always make a comeback to Pan-Africanism. but after they have burned their bridges in the rest of the world. This was true.
They resort back.
Yeah, they come back, they become Pan-Africanist. After they have burned bridges with their Euro-Africanism or whatever ideology, Pan-Arabism and whatever. This was true of Gaddafi. This is now true of Morocco. The only country that can consistently remain Pan-African from the beginning is Algeria. And the rivalry between Algeria and Morocco is actually the one now shaping Africa's diplomacy.
Yes.
In a huge way. Morocco has come back. It is genuine. Remember, King Mohammed V was really the leading radical Pan-Africanist. When we're talking about the Monrovia bloc versus the Casablanca bloc, Kenya was in the Casablanca bloc.
Conservative.
So, no, not conservative. The Casablanca bloc was not conservative. It was
the other way around.
Yes, the radical Pan-African opinion about Africa must unite.
That's when Munywa was foreign affairs.
Yes. So,
Munywa
there are two Moroccos. The Morocco of the radical opinion, which is the past, and we hope they will be reborn in the future, and the Morocco of the conservative that want to be part of Europe, not part of Africa. And between the two Moroccos, that's where Kenya has to hew its own foreign policy. Now, with the transformation that has just taken place, and this can be very risky to put it this way, we are now walking a very high wire between realism and idealism in our foreign policy. Realism means we have a food security crisis in Kenya. That's realism. Now, our farmers are suffering from lack of fertilizers, from lack of other agricultural inputs. And we have been getting these commodities from Ukraine and Russia. And now they're at war we can't get. So how do we deal with it? That is the realist question. Two, the idealist question. We are the leading African nation in terms of Pan-Africanism. In January this year and February, we convened and chaired a round table on the idea of self-determination. And self-determination here means that we continue to uphold the right of Polisario to be independent, in whichever form they get. Now, between realism and idealism, that is where the new Hasra, government will have to work, to determine how we're going, and that will be a future debate. What it means is that Kenya has an opportunity. It has huge convening power. Therefore, it is possible to get all the African states together. The key, not everyone, the key African states, to debate the question about the future of Polisario, and debating it outside the context of our trade with Morocco, because the fertilizer trade is inevitable, because Morocco will offer the cheapest fertilizers for us. It has always knocked at our doors to do the same, but fertilizer should not be part of the African diplomacy. We should not be talking about fertilizer diplomacy, because that is not going to be sustainable economic relationship. We need to go beyond fertilizers. What are we as Kenyans exporting to Morocco? What is Morocco importing from us?
Now, Morocco is taking our tea and coffee?
No, that's what I'm saying. That we need to talk about it in larger whole. We have a joint economic commission with Ethiopia.
Because of time. Because I can see we are just about to wind up and we won't be able to exhaust this conversation.
But let me then say,
I just wanted to ask you one brief question, and we come to Hashi. For how long then, you talk about foreign policy? We had the Kibaki administration, it comes, and Kibaki leans on the Sahrawi side. Yes. Yeah. And then we, at the expense of Morocco. Yeah. We had the Jubilee administration. What do?
The same.
They went to Sahrawi, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Now we have Ruto's presidency. It's leaning back on Morocco. How then do we have a steady foreign policy if we flip-flop on Morocco, between Sahrawi and Morocco, because of interest in the first place? Because, as you say, this hacks back into history as well. There was Kwame Nkrumah who wanted the African Union. Even that was still the issue then, and the Casablanca faction and Kwame Nkrumah faction. If you remember,
it was the other way around.
The other way around. Let's hear from Hashi briefly.
Quickly. No, if Mr. Kenyatta was buying oranges at State House, Mr. Ruto will bring mangoes. If Mr. Kenyatta was supporting the Sahrawis, he will support the Moroccans. Mr. Ruto will do everything the opposite of what Mr. Kenyatta has done. It's the nature of our politics here to take things very personally. The Isaac clan in northern Somalia and the Tigrays want a flag. I implacably oppose secessionism in Africa. I oppose it in every form.
Are we still on Morocco?
Wait, yes, it's Morocco. I'm coming to it. If you get the train of the thought. However, these rebellious Sahrawis have a point. And I'm loath to support them. Because the Saks from northern Somalia and the Tigrays will call me a hypocrite for saying that I support the Sahrawi Republic's ambitions, but I don't support Somaliland, which wants to cut the Somalis into clan states, and I don't support the Tigrays, the TPLF, which wants to just cause bedlam in the Horn of Africa. They have no case. There's no case for secessionism in Eastern Africa, nor in Southern Africa, but there is one group of people who have been under the foot of fascism, of Franco. They have been under the foot of the only absolute monarchy left in Africa. And they have absolutely nothing to do with Morocco. Morocco, you know, the Baal is a kingdom that's very old, from the Almoravids and all this, one of the most progressive civilizations in Africa. It has now, you know, turned the clock back. I think that the Sahrawi Republic, in which Mr. Ruto invited the president to, they have about 150 people who recognize them. They're a de facto state. They've got legitimacy. It's a gone case. There's nothing anyone can do about it. And this fertilizer business is a bribe to Kenya to try and go back into not recognizing this. So you see how inexperienced the farmers from Rift Valley are. They sent a tweet to Twitter saying that they had to stop recognition, and Mr. Ruto deleted it 5 minutes later. I was saying that there were greenhorns in foreign affairs. One of the things that Mr. Ruto ought to do is that on the issue of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense, he has to bring the best and the best. He can appoint all his people in the rest of the government. But on these two dockets, he needs to get someone like Mr. Midamba there. And we need people who know something. I give it to my senior, Noblige Oblige.
Dubal, let me just say a few things about it. It is very, very important for the Ruto administration, and we are going to be looking at this administration very closely the next 5 years. First, the very first time you are elected president and deputy president, you become the subject of Kenya. You are no longer alone. And you cannot make statement without calculated risk. So in the foreign policy, the first thing that need to be done is knowledge of the issues. What is the history and what's the weight that impact that issue? How did we arrive at where we are? And secondly, you need to have a very clear bargaining options. What are bargaining options that Kenya can have that will not create ruckus around the world or a multi-faced kind of situation? And last is the final position. You want to be very precise what you can do. And here my first reaction is leave the tweet alone, because Trump basically damaged the entire U.S. foreign policy and foreign affairs and foreign position by using tweet. So leave the tweet alone and now depend on the regular diplomatic channel. So the first thing first, there is no reason to break away from what has already been established. You know, this Polisario, this area was not part of Morocco.
Yes.
It was colonized for many, many years. The AU has clearly stated its opinion on that.
Yep.
The UN has stated its opinion. It is important, and I'm much more practical in my approach right now looking at the world. I'm a realist. Yes, we need fertilizer from Morocco. How do we do it? We must support the African position.
Absolutely.
We must support EGAT and the East Africa community. we must support the UN.
And the world
we
opinion.
must be seen as part of that, because we are part and parcel of the international community, and Kenya is playing a major role as a leader of the East Africa community. So we must do that. But there is a bilateral arrangement that we can make as a country with Morocco to purchase their fertilizer for our goods and services. In exchange, we are selling coffee and we are selling tea to Morocco.
Right.
That's unacceptable.
But even as we're winding up, I'll give each of you at least 30 seconds. Let me just hear from Professor Aseka, and then I ask my question briefly. Professor, you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, we have discussed all these issues, but we are not looking at the infrastructure of acquisition and distribution. That leads me to the maleficences that we have in our society, manifested in the form of, one, what you can call tenderpreneurship, two, leaderpreneurship. These tenderpreneurship and leaderpreneurship are driven by the quest for gain that cause all sorts of distortions in the processes. And so, insofar as we have not addressed as to what infrastructural arrangements we need and policy provisions to deal with these problems, then we will land again into a problem of malpractices that is a continuation of what has happened in previous regimes. And in that review, in that case, knowing that corruption has a distorting effect, we have to see how the government, insofar as it's concerned with agricultural inputs being subsidized. We have not had a fundamental reference to livestock inputs, because there are various sectors of the economy which require empowerment, so to say. And so it's a question of looking at them all so that the nation is seen to be fair. And finally, the issue of the nutritional policy that we have not had in this country, that is linked to the question of the inputs and output. We need to have a whole national governance framework that addresses various sectors so that we can look at these malpractices where the mechanics that support them are removed. Yes.
Professor Naomi Damba, I'll come to you briefly as we prepare our headline thoughts. I can see you just remaining with 3 minutes. You raise the issue of foreign policy. And the question that I wanted to pose to you is the fact that we have, on top of the foreign policy of every country, is the national interest first. And we have a new regime coming in with President William Ruto. Our interest first is to have a food secure country, and fertilizer is a key component at the end of the day. Looking at Sahrawi, yes, it has been recognized by the African Union and United Nations as it is right now. We're talking about a population of how many people, right? 650,000. I'm not saying that now because you have low figures of population, then we should slight you away. But what is our national interest between Kenya and Sahrawi? How are we benefiting exceedingly from that particular country compared to Morocco? That we have to make this very critical decision on even on foreign policy, shut them away and go for Morocco, because there we have interest. And if this is then put on the table by the king of Morocco, that we have to rescind our recognition of Sahrawi as a state as it is, then what do we do? This is from Naomi Damba.
Dibal, relationship and the trend of conduct foreign policy right now is the multifaceted. It's a multiplicity.
Let's just speak to, because we can't go on the multiplicity right now because of time, sir.
Give me. I have to have a theory. I have to have a base. No, I have to have a base on which I'm talking. So it doesn't matter if there's 600 people, in Polisario. It's the same like Qatar. It's a small state with very few people, but it's a huge economy on which we depend on their trade and all that. And therefore, we cannot make it in isolation. There is nothing stopping us from having a bilateral relationship, as I indicated. But the issue is that you must have one way or another. It's something that as a country we cannot accept from anybody, whether it is the US or China or anybody. We cannot, otherwise we'll be in a catch-22. If we reject Russia, we must accept US. If we reject US, we must accept that. We can have all relationship with Morocco without interfering with the Malta support, the UN Africa history for the Polisario, without any question at all. And I think the safest place where Kenya stands is you are our friend. We are going to continue standing with OU, and we will stand with the United Nations, but we are going to trade with you. We are going to buy fertilizer from Morocco, a deal. We are going to sell coffee and tea to you as African countries. There is nothing stopping us from doing that. That's the posture that I would like to see my country take about.
Thank you. And as you can see there, this is the East African, where Kenya, this was yesterday, Kenya clarifies position on Sahrawi after the gaffe that we saw there. And it says that Kenya says it has not abandoned a decade-old policy in which it supported the African Union's call for the free self-determination of Sahrawi people.
Yes.
In a diplomatic note sent to embassies and representatives' offices of international organizations in Nairobi, Kenya walked back on a controversial tweet last week in which President William Ruto appeared to end recognition of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic in favor of an autonomy offer by Morocco. Instead, Foreign Affairs Principal Secretary Macharia Kamau said Nairobi has not departed from supporting the African Union call, as well as mediation programs under the UN to have the people of Western Sahara decide their future, quote unquote. He says Kenya's position on Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic is fully aligned with the decision of the Organization of African Unity, now African Union, to admit SRDR to its membership on 22nd August 1982, and the AU Charter, which calls for the unquestionable and inalienable rights or right over people of self-determination. Further, the country allies itself with decision of subsequent AU assemblies of heads of states and government on SRDR. This is what Kamau said in a note dated the 16th there. And I think it's good clarification. So let's get headline thoughts as we're winding up. Professor Peter Kagwanja.
I think Kenya has to be very careful as it moves to the future diplomacy, because our wish-wash kind of policy towards apartheid South Africa has cost us a lot in long term. Because we, unlike Tanzania and other countries, we don't have that privileged access to South Africa. We have had to negotiate.
30 seconds, sir.
Yeah. So it is important that even though state interests prevail are important, we must also align to the larger ideal of the African people. That's all I would say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Naomi Dabra.
It is important for the team that is coming in, which include President Ruto Kagati, now to settle on the need of Kenya. Politics was yesterday, today is real life of the people of Kenya. The expectation is very high from those on the bottom. They are going to have to deal with that. President Ruto is the president for the Republic and the people of Kenya. And therefore, we need to really now take a look at the history, what President Uhuru is leaving, what Moi Kibaki left, and Moi and everybody, and then move focus ahead on changing instead of creating commission to figure out what was wrong in the last 10 years.
All right. The commission to look to probe the state capture. I think that would be a nice topic next week. Let's hear from Professor Aseka briefly, 30 seconds.
Yes, the question here is what can be described as national foreign policy versus national interest. And I think you captured it well. But we should know that national policy must be well rationalized. Rationalized in terms of statesmanship that is based on values and principles. So that it's not a question of what might appear to be basic support tokenism, opportunism, driving policy versus what will appear to be solidarity with the rest of the continent based on the principle of self-determination. And if we drop away from that, then we send a wrong signal, a signal of opportunism that is not correct.
All right, Hashi.
I want to call on the president of Uganda, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, to kickstart a conference on wealth creation in Africa and invite the leading intellectuals and economists, public policy thinkers, and politicians to have an agenda for this continent on the issue of wealth creation, because he specifically brought it up at the inauguration of our new president, and he's duty bound to do something about it. So I urge his ambassador here to write to him and tell him what we're saying here.
What's your email? Let's leave it at that. Thank you very much for your valued company. We've been watching of course, Global Today, discussing a lot of issues. We shall pick up next week on pertinent issues as well, looking at South Sudan. And now, with that particular oil drill, that, of course, it has been sold, or maybe they're in negotiation. Next week, we'll clarify that as we